if you renew at a higher level. If you were a $25 a year member and you renew at $50, you get both a shirt and a pin. Or if you renew as a monthly pledger of any amount, you get the shirt and the pin. The monthly pledgers really help us plan our budgets because it is, you know, consistent monthly memberships. And if anyone here is itching to become a lifetime member, I will personally give you the pin off my chest. So that is either something special or something terrible, depending upon your point of view. So if you've been considering it, please do. And if you promise that you're going to do a pledge of $115 a month, which is enough to get you the National Party membership within a year, because I'll come hunt you down if you don't, I will give you the pin now. So Nick gets it all the time, and I would like to, I'm so competitive, and I really just want something to brag to Nick about for that very bad joke he gave at the last LNC meeting about a racing snail. Ask me about it later. Are we ready? All right. So see me after if you'd like to become a national member. Let me just get my damn Apple with its passcodes. All righty. There was a pretty thorough introduction there, except for my husband, unfortunately, is not the current chair. Last election, there was a fantastic candidate. It was a tough race, but Colorado has an equally competent chair in the form of Victoria Reynolds, who ran a wonderful campaign. So, some of you here, I know, have heard this presentation before. You may tend to nod out. I promise you that I usually do throw in some zingers in it that you'll miss if you nod out, because I tend to go off script. In the beginning, I'm on script, and by the end, who knows? And I do have a vodka drink here, so it might get it even a little bit more off script. But I love, my husband used to work at home with me, and he eventually had to go rent an office because I'm nonstop. I'm 100% libertarian all the time. It does not stop, and he couldn't take it anymore. He swore that he could give every single one of my presentations because he's heard me say them just sitting in the office. So the first time he was around for this particular presentation, I knew I had to do something special. So, you know, he was sitting, eyes glazed over, and I said, listen, everyone, I haven't done this before, but I have a confession to make. And that got his interest a little bit. And I said, I'm having an affair. And that got his interest a whole lot. His head jerked up. And I said, yes. I go, it's steamy and it's really torrid and exciting. I go, but it's with the Libertarian Party and its statement of principles. And then he just put his head back down because he's like, tell me something I don't know. And that's a joke, but it's also somewhat real. I'm one of the people who, we all have our different libertarian stories, how we became, let me get this, because I tend to wonder. Is it? I'm one of the people, with our different stories, as I said, I'm one of the people who became a libertarian in a way I haven't heard anyone else before. I didn't know any libertarians. I didn't even know what a libertarian was. I wasn't particularly fond of Ayn Rand. I read the books, and the one with the John Galt speech that, oh my Lord, that was just way too long. And so that was about it. I thought it was an interesting idea. So I was on Facebook, and I was arguing with people. And don't be shocked, because I never do that. But then I used to argue with people on Facebook. And I come from a very fundamentalist Christian background at the time. I'm still Christian. I'm no longer fundamentalist. You would consider me a liberal Christian. And I was arguing with some fellow Christians. And we were arguing about those, there was a bills a while ago in some states that put spikes under overpasses so that homeless people wouldn't sleep there. And I was absolutely appalled at this. It was treating people like animals. And my fellow Christians, to my shame, thought it was a wonderful idea. And when I was arguing about it, they called me the worst possible name anyone could ever call me in the entire world. They called me a liberal Democrat. And I about had a heart attack. And because I come from Calvary Chapel movement. Anyone knows the Calvary Chapel movement? If you're Christian, you're Republican. That is just the way it is. When you convert and sign your little, come to Jesus card, you also change your voter registration. Because I was a Democrat before, and then I was a Republican rhino after that. So I wanted to run away from that terrible title as fast as I can. So I did what I call an ass fact, which is where you pull a fact right out of your ass and you present it as real. And I said, I'm not that. I go, I'm more of a libertarian. But I didn't even know what a libertarian was. It sounded good. It wasn't a Democrat. And that got me out of the situation. But then I remembered I've done this before on a theology forum I used to own. I used to use this nickname for myself that I had no idea what it meant, and then I found out later it was pornographic. So I decided, let's not do that again. So I went to the Libertarian Party website, lp.org, and said, I'll figure out what a libertarian is. I pulled up the platform. I got through the statement of principles in the preamble. I didn't get through the rest of it yet because the next thing I did was go to Florida, I'm from Florida, but I was in Colorado at the time, the Colorado Secretary of State website, and changed my voter registration on the spot after just reading those two things. My jaw did drop open, I was like, oh my God. I go, these are things I've been thinking for a long time, and I never could put them in words, and I don't really think anyone else thought the same way I did. Now, there's something you need to know before that. Before that, as I said, I was a rhino, but I didn't even vote. I was like a Christmas and Easter Christian. I'd go to church on those 2 days. Not that I was that, but I was the equivalent of a voter. I might vote in the presidential, and that was it. I used to take great joy at the ballots that would come in Florida of throwing them in the garbage, though I did keep the hanging Chad one because that better be worth money in 50 years. So I didn't even vote. Me and my husband met online. I was this nice conservative Christian girl that wasn't involved in politics whatsoever. He comes home from his lunch break, and I said, hey, honey, I've changed my voter registration. And he's like, to what? You don't even vote. And I was like, to Libertarian. He's like, oh, okay. And that was the end of that. Now, I had moved from Florida, and I had a lot of friends in Florida because I worked. I work now, but I work from home. You don't realize how many friends you meet at the workplace. So I knew nobody after a year of being here in Florida. My husband was constantly going, you need to get out more. You need to meet people. You need to get involved in something. Needless to say, he regrets that. Boy, does he regret that. All righty, so now that you have the background, my particular passion is the Libertarian Party Statement of Principles. Anyone who knows me knows that's not a big surprise. And the title of the talk today is the Libertarian Party Statement of Principles, through which liberty shall prevail. If you want to know more about me than even I want to know, you can check me out at Lpedia, and it will show that I have a perverse love of committees. As I see it, the Libertarian Party has gone far astray from its original mission. Somewhere along the way, our commitment to being the party of principle was replaced by a shallow, opportunistic goal of winning elections now. Any election, anywhere. Principles be damned, according to the proponents of this vision. We should back off from scary positions, tone down our rhetoric, find out what voters want, and tailor our message to what they want to hear. The nadir of this mindset was reached in a Monday message dated March 9, 2009. It carried the heading, "The most important principle is winning." I would be hard put to come up with a statement more antithetical to our beliefs and purpose. Just for starters, winning is not a principle at all. It might be a goal or a strategy for achieving our goals, but it's not a principle. And if it were, it's not our principle. This is pure opportunistic rubbish, exactly what you'd expect from a Republican or Democratic Party hack. No. The most important principle for libertarians is the principle of self-ownership, as set forth in the preamble to our platform and our statement of principles. These are the standards by which every policy statement in every campaign must be judged. And anyone who is uncomfortable with this yardstick probably ought to be in another party, one where the most important principle is winning.
My fellow libertarians, our party is at a crossroads. Either we stand up boldly for liberty or we lose all relevance. The voters who want real, meaningful, substantive change will direct their energies elsewhere, while opportunists who seek short-term electoral victories will support the Republican and Democratic politicians who offer a far better chance of winning now. Yours in liberty, David F. Nolan, founder of the Libertarian Party, July 17th, 2009.
Oh, that got your, ooh, now I hit my mouth. That was wonderful. And I have to say, if this were a church service, I'd go, amen, Brother David.
Amen.
Amen, Brother David. And I couldn't agree with him more. And that was a while ago, and I think we're still in the same spot, to be honest with you. Though I think things have gotten a little bit better. 1 second, because it lost my notes. It wants me to just ad-lib here. Damn you, Apple. Okay, there we go. Now, he mentioned the statement of principles in the preamble, which is interesting because those were the two things I read that converted me to the party. So, of course, that was music to my ears. Most people have read the statement of principles. Some of you haven't read the statement of principles, and that's okay, no judgment here. But something I did learn in church, and I'm going to be talking about church a lot. If that offends you, just translate it into whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I learned something, though, in church, is that there's a difference between reading something and hearing something. There are plenty of people who've read the Bible, but they hear the Bible and it does something different for them. But that goes for any great piece of literature. Hearing it is different from reading it. You get something different from both of them. So I'd like to first start this presentation with reading the Statement of Principles. And I want, out loud, and I want you to listen to it, even if you've read it before, even if you've heard it before. But I want you to listen to it as if you are a Republican or a Democrat, or just your average person today, and realize how really revolutionary these words are. I think we've become jaded to our own beliefs. And it goes, let's see, well, that's not it yet, so you just got to listen to me. I guess that's what I did on purpose, so you couldn't ignore me. Not you. Okay. All righty. We, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. We hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion over their own lives and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal right of others to live in whatever manner they choose. Governments throughout history have regularly operated on the opposite principle that the state has the right to dispose of the lives of individuals and the fruits of their labor. Even within the United States, all political parties other than our own grant to government the right to regulate the lives of individuals and seize the fruits of their labor without their consent. We, on the contrary, deny the right of any government to do these things and hold that where governments exist, they must not violate the rights of any individual, namely the right to life. Accordingly, we support the prohibition of the initiation of physical force against others, the right to liberty of speech and action. Accordingly, we oppose all attempts by government to abridge the freedom of speech and press, as well as government censorship in any form, and the right to property. Accordingly, we oppose all government interference with private property, such as confiscation, nationalization, and eminent domain, and support the prohibition of robbery, trespass, fraud, and misrepresentation. Since governments, when instituted, must not violate individual rights, we oppose all interference by government in the areas of voluntary and contractual relations amongst individuals. People should not be forced to sacrifice their lives and their property for the benefit of others. They should be left free by government to deal with one another as free traders. And the resultant economic system, the only one compatible with the protection of individual rights, is the free market. And again, amen and amen, right? Amen, Sister Karen Ann. So what I've done is a bit of libertarian archaeology. I'm a paralegal by trade, and one of the things that I do is forensic document examination. And that's the way I started with this, because I was so interested in this document that I had to know where it came from. And this is a work in progress. Every presentation, someone comes up to me afterward and gives me a little bit of history that I did not have before. Ugh, getting warm up here. And I believe this examination of history is very long overdue. When I worked my way back in time to find out about the genesis of this party, not that long ago, just under 50 years, I discovered that very important pieces of our history have been lost or obscured or miscast deliberately, unfortunately, but at best sorely neglected, and that we're in danger quite literally of losing the most important parts of our history, our formation. And my goal has been to be the time traveler that dispels some of this mist. Some of you may know some of this, but I doubt, if you haven't heard this before, that you know all of it. The first convention of the party took place in Denver, yay, Colorado, in 1972. And it was a motley crew. It was a motley crew of minarchists, anarchists, Randians, and every possible permutation in between that you could. See, I keep tricking myself that I'm not old and the glasses have to go back on. And they were all united around one idea. They were united around the idea of radical individualism. And yes, I did say the R word, radical. It's a word we should not be scared of. Even though we should be scared when AOC uses it, we should not be scared when we use it. The Libertarian Party was founded as a radical revolutionary movement. It was a peaceful revolution, but it was a revolution nonetheless. And we should not pretend it was anything else. Those words that I read before, they're nothing less than a call to revolution. A peaceful revolution, again. Any current perspective in the Libertarian Party today that does not come to grips with what the early party actually said, with what the statement of principle actually says, is cutting off the branch upon which we sit, and I can tell you that will not go very well. Libertarianism wasn't just a radical revolutionary movement in 1972. It remains a radical revolutionary movement today, if we're going to be true to its guiding philosophy. Now, in 72, the early party leaders were concerned that as the party got a little bit older, that entrenched interest and cliques and all the other political bullshit would come in, and it would ruin this little baby that they conceived, and that principles would be lost or watered down through petty power struggles, the usual. And it would turn this revolutionary idea into also ran, also tried footnote in history, as so many parties before us have been. A young D. Frank Robinson from Oklahoma, he's also a party founder. Everyone knows David Nolan, but D. Frank Robinson is a co-founder. He was there in 72. He was critical in every single part of this party. And he's still with us, and I have the honor to know him. Him and Ed Carlson came up with a plan. They would put into the party what they actually called an article of faith. They would put into the party a statement that would guide everyone that came after them, and that this statement could not be modified without, and I want you to pay attention to this, a super majority, we all kind of know that, you had your business meeting today, and a super quorum, which I doubt you had in your business today. That's very unusual. And this idea was approved by the original Constitution, Bylaws, and Rules Committee. And Robinson says he realized that this was actually terrible parliamentary form, and you'd read that even in Roberts. But that is terrible parliamentary form when the survival of an organization qua organization is important. But that was not us. We concluded that an existentially ideological organization, it was the principles that must survive. The principles, not the name, was the sine qua non of the party. And not some hollow shell which barely bore our name, but nothing else. So they decided they were going to protect the principles. And everyone at the founding convention, when the statement of principles was passed, I'm going to tell you something. I'm not lying. You're going to think I'm telling you a fish story. But the statement of principles was passed unanimously. I don't think anything in Libertarian Party history has ever been passed unanimously since that date. And even though it was only 78 Libertarians, you do know that that statistically should lead to 511 different opinions, and it did not. They were unanimous. So that's what they did. Robinson described the statement of principles saying, this is the anchor and the lifeline. Do not tread too far from it, or you may perish. If you stay close, you may eventually prosper for your efforts. And they did it. They passed it, and they secured its survival by saying it could only be amended by a 7/8 vote of registered delegates at convention. Everyone tends to breeze past that. I don't know how many of you here have been to a convention. 7/8 of registered delegates, notice I didn't say 7/8 of people on the floor. It says registered delegates are not in the room at any one time. They could be, it's possible. It doesn't usually happen. I don't think it's ever happened. So let that sink in. As I say, you could take the Jim and Carrie approach with the real pretty girl when he asked her if they have a chance to date, and she said, yeah, it's 1 in a million. He said, I have a chance. That's about the same chance you have of doing anything with the statement of principles. It's the parliamentary equivalent of saying, too bad, so sad, you can't do it. And that was by design. Could it happen? Yes. Is it likely? No. If you can't get at least 1/8 of the delegates to stand up for the original principles of this party, it's irrelevant. The party was dead long ago, and that convention would only be the official declaration of its demise. Those initial founders, though, realized that they were all pretty excited in 1972, probably had a bit too much to drink, and that was an important decision because what they were doing was taking a key to the party, throwing it into a vault, and then destroying the key. And they decided you can't do that over the course of one weekend. So they gave themselves a 2-year cooling off period. They said, let's think about this for 2 years before that 7/8 kick in. When we come back in 1974, we'll have the normal threshold of 2/3 required for bylaws. If you all want to change it, you want to gut it, you want to remove it, you want to wipe your butt with it, whatever it might be, you can do that with a 2/3 vote in 1974. So it was rash, but it was not as rash as they thought. So I wanted to, up here is the current bylaws that deals with the statement of principles. And you can see the 7/8 vote of all registered delegates at a convention, and that the platform is supposed to emanate from the statement of principles. This wording here is pretty much the exact same wording that existed in 1972, and like a unanimous vote, there's really nothing that libertarians love more than amending bylaws, and this was not amended except for deleting, let me see here, well, trying to find it, never mind, forget it, I'll just tell you, I don't even know what's on my handouts half the time. In 72, they put in that language that it could be amended in 1974. Obviously, after 1974, they deleted that sentence because 1974 had already passed. They should have done it as a proviso. Here I am getting all legalistic with the first convention. All righty. So, 1974. What happened? Did they come in and they get rid of it? Did they come in and say, you guys had a bit too much to drink and we're going to soften this a little bit? Speaking of drinking. Nah, these are libertarians. They decided they were going to make it even more radical than it was in 1972. They were like, hold my beer, basically. And something else I wanted to add, though. In 72, the statement of principles was given even more importance. The Judicial Committee, which you either hate or you love, its original purpose was to guard the statement of principles. Because even though we have it there, what's to stop a bunch of delegates to say, screw that, we're going to change the platform into something that doesn't conform? The Judicial Committee. If 1/10, is it 1/10 that, whatever, close enough, if a certain number of delegates at convention believe that any platform plank is in contradiction to the statement of principles, they can appeal it, and the Judicial Committee can overrule it. This has happened once in our history in 1976, and Murray Rothbard was very upset because it was his plank. And actually, I think the Judicial Committee made a wrong decision then. There was a plank that said repudiating the national debt is preferable to paying it or doing anything else with it. And the Judicial Committee said that was against the statement of principles. I think they were wrong, but we're only human, and that was the one decision that has ever been made overruling something. Of course, Murray Rothbard, being Murray Rothbard, then gutted the Judicial Committee after that in a fit of peevish rage, and that hadn't been fixed for a while, but it's fixed now. Also, resolutions. Resolutions also have to pass muster. You can't go, well, we can't get it in the platform, but let's get a resolution that we think tariffs are great. Nope. Resolutions must be approved by a 2/3 vote, and they're reviewable by the Judicial Committee. Well, we'll just start our own party in, some state and have that be Republican 2.0. No, each affiliate party, in order to be affiliated with the national party as a condition of their affiliation, has to affirm the statement of principles, and any party that repudiates it can be disaffiliated. Whether the LNC would actually do that's another story. In theory, they could. Okay, so funny enough, though, we're going back to 72 just for a second. When they said we're going to have a statement of principles that's going to have all these safeguards in it, they didn't even write it yet. They just knew they wanted to write it. So they passed that bylaw without even knowing what they passed. So it was even worse than I have to read it to know what's in it, I guess. But they said to the platform committee, go ahead and write this thing, because they knew they still had to vote on it. And what came out of the platform committee is shocking. It sounded like it came out of a platform committee, and it was about as poetic as a Xerox copy manual. And no, we didn't need that. So what they did is ask people on the floor if they could take that language and make it a little less boring, I guess, or less, I don't know. I don't even know how you describe things that come out of committee, but I think you know what I mean. And interestingly, they almost went on to approve the platform, and people said, how can we approve the platform when we don't know what's in the statement of principles that the platform has to conform to? And Tony Nathan, God bless her soul, if you're wondering how I know all of this, I've listened to the 1972 tapes, which were moldering in D. Frank Robinson's basement for all these years. We recovered them and restored them, and I've listened to them, probably the first time they'd been listened to in over 4 decades. And on that tape, Tony Nathan's voice is on there, and I can't imitate her, but she had this wonderfully feminine, high voice, and she said, "We will be the laughingstock of the world if we adopt planks without first specifying our principles." And I loved her ever since that day. So here's the various proposals that were put forth by the delegates. What's interesting is I don't think anyone has seen these, again, in over 4 decades, because I transcribed these from that tape. I have never found them published anywhere. And I can send these to you if you want to read them, because, as you can see, some of them, like that one, that's a Libertarian wrote that for sure. And, you see Mark Frazier wrote that one. Here's the one that we're going to go back to that John Hospers wrote. Bill Sussel, Diane Amston. Diane Amston's interesting. She was quite the Randian, which I think you can see from here. She has some very interesting things here. Let me find a right is a moral sanction of an individual's freedom to act. If you've read John Galt's speech, this is John Galt's speech that almost made it into our platform. Okay, this is the handwritten version, but we'll go back to that of John Hospers. Let's go back to John Hospers. I think we should all be probably grateful that some of those were not passed because it contained language like man is not a sacrificial animal, which sounded great in Atlas Shrugged, but would not be so wonderful in our platform. What happened then in 1974 to make them want to change this? I'm going to tell you something else shocking, and you will not believe it. Divisions and factions were beginning to form in the party. I know, that's never happened since 74. We're so much better than that. And let me just remind me, if you see me take my glasses off, say, come on, girl, you're old, just keep them on. I'll forgive you. I'm a young 50. So, divisions and factions were forming, and the party, which was small, was threatening to split in two. It could not afford to split in two in 1974. We can't afford to do it now, but they certainly couldn't afford to do it then. And both groups were arguing from fundamental libertarian principles. There was no one that was clearly wrong. So an agreement was reached at the Dallas Convention in 1974 that while the party would be continuously working to a free society, free from the initiation of force and coercion, that the party itself would take no endgame position, whether or not the state would exist in our Libertopia. They said the settling of this debate would be reserved until it was actually meaningful, because it's actually quite stupid to argue about that now. Once a minimal state was achieved, we could argue then about whether to get rid of that state or not. And that is something that's been known as the Dallas Accord. Some of you have heard of it, some of you have not. A lot of mythology and, frankly, false information, some of it purposeful, has arisen surrounding the Dallas Accord. And it's been from all camps. There isn't any one, villain in this story. And I've been astonished to find out there has not been more pushback on this. Again, I've only been in the party 4 years, or as Sam would say, 2 months. And, maybe there was that I don't know about. Tell me if you knew anyone else done this work. But as far as I know, I'm the first one to throw a conniption fit and put my obsessive-compulsive disorder to good use. There's been a lot of what we like to call today, alternative facts. There has been a lot of alternative facts about the Dallas Accord. One alternative fact that's the most damaging, no, nobody reminded me. Yeah, I just push it down when I don't need them. But it's messing with my hair. 1 second, can't. Here we go. One alternative fact is that the Dallas Accord is an interesting bit of history, but it was only binding upon the delegates that were there in 1974, that it's useless to bring up today because it has nothing to do with us. Just an interesting artifact of history. And usually that particular argument is used by people who want to go in a more moderate direction, because the statement of principles, or even the Dallas Accord, is somewhat embarrassing to those who do want to go in a more moderate direction. One thing I want to say here, if you happen to be someone who does, I'm not insulting you. I'm not trying to insult you. I have the highest respect for you. I'm just trying to deal with the facts of history. And if I may challenge Ben Shapiro for one moment, the facts don't care about our feelings. There's some things I'm going to bring up today that my little feels get hurt about too, that I don't particularly like. But history is history, and if we're going to be fair to history, we say it as it is. And I have confirmed my research with witness testimony and document testimony. And document testimony is more important because witnesses forget, but documents don't. You can misinterpret the documents, but the documents themselves don't lie. So one of the original architects of this idea was D. Frank Robinson, who is with us. And I came to my conclusions before I talked to him about it. And when I talked to him about it, he was like, oh my God, you have that spot on, nail on the head. And that was a great encouragement to me. Some witnesses have differed with my analysis in some parts. But as I said, that's how you know they probably were really there. Any witness testimony that completely concurs with each other is probably made up. So, what does the evidence say? Do I have proof of this statement? Because this statement to a lot of you is probably pretty bold, that we are bound by the Dallas Accord today. Can I prove it? I can prove it. We have an artifact from the 1974 convention that rings through history, and it cuts through history like a fog to answer this question. And what that is between 1972 and 1974, the statement of principles were amended by that 2/3 vote. They were made more radical. They've never been amended since because it's practically impossible. What were the amendments made to the statement of principles? That will tell us something about the state of mind. And let me say something to you. The amendments to the statement of principles are the Dallas Accord. The statement of principles, the hardest thing in this party to change. The Dallas Accord is embodied in the changes to the Statement of Principles. You want to tell me again that the Statement of Principles are not binding upon us today? It's impossible. The Statement of Principles is the very heart of the party. You can't go against it, or you're not a part of the Libertarian Party, meaning as an affiliate. Any one person in this room can disagree with any part of it. No one here is required to walk lockstep. I disagree with the party platform on abortion. Some of us disagree with the party platform on other things. That's okay. What we're talking about is what the party as an organization believes, not what any individual libertarian is bound to. The changes can be summed up in four things. We have, let's go past here. This is a little handwritten thing. We'll go back to that story if I have time. This is the 1972 one. 1974 one, but here's what we want to get to. I went through, using my OCD, and highlighted all the changes, and I don't think this had ever been done for a while either. Most of us knew of some changes, like the words where government exists, which maybe sounds kind of odd. But what I did is I grouped these into the various types of changes. Blue is style and grammar changes that we don't have to be too concerned about. Green, we were ahead of the time. We made it gender neutral. The purple ones are questionable. I could argue they were Dallas Accord changes, but I think you can argue either way, so I will not use those. But the yellow ones are most definitely the Dallas Accord changes, because what was the dispute? The dispute was between the anarchists and the monarchists. And it was that language which made the existence of the state optional. So let's take a look. The 1972 version said the sole function of government is the protection of rights of each individual. It also said government has only one legitimate function, the existence of individual rights. That sounds pretty good, right? 1974 said where governments exist, they must not violate the rights of any individual. And governments, when instituted, must not violate individual rights, showing that it might not be necessary. I don't really like the word government there because I think government's inevitable. What they meant was the state. The state is the monopolization on the enforcement of law. These changes most people knew about. But the changes go further than that, and I think those are the minor changes, actually. There was a very profound change that was made that most people do not notice. And that is, most people who are deep in the libertarian weeds know that we believe in something called negative rights. There are negative rights and positive rights. Negative rights are the rights that you have by merely existing. We don't believe in positive rights, or at least unassumed positive rights. No one owes you health care. No one owes you food. All they owe you is not to violently interfere with you obtaining that from a willing person. So we believe in negative rights. The Statement of Principles in 1972 assigned a positive role to the government. The government must protect rights. The 1974 Statement of Principles stood that on its head and assigned only a negative role to the government. The government must not violate rights. And that is a very significant change. And it has a deep implication for the battles between the monarchists and the anarchists. If you're a monarchist, you can't simply point to rights protection and say that's what the state must do. What the argument then becomes is, are they violating rights in doing it? And that's the crux of the debate. It's 1% of what we believe. And that's all that matters, really, is are rights being violated. So I think that is very important. So all ideological issues about the state must center around whether or not the state violates rights. There's no little big state, any state argument in the Statement of Principles. There is a definitive stand. The party is neutral. Individual libertarians are not. I'm not. But the party is. And Harry Brown, I think, expressed this perfectly when he talked about the various disputes in the party. He did it, and he's not the first one who did it, but he popularized it. I know. I'm going to put him back on in a minute. He said we're all on a train going north, and some of us will want to get off earlier than the others. But let's all, stay on this train and help it running until your stop point, at which point we'll wish you well, and those of us who wish to continue further will continue on our journey. And that has served us very well. But as libertarians tend to do, we love to throw other people out of the party. And the new arguments come that said that's a terrible analogy. The analogy should be that we're on two different trains. One's going to California and one's going to Canada. And they're so different, we're not on the same thing. That an end goal of no state is so different from an end game of a little state that we're not even on the same train. If you're going to take that route, well, what about the classical liberals? Do we throw them out too? Are they going like on a train to Washington? How far do we parse this out till you're the only damn person on the train? I hope you know how to drive a train. All righty. Now you gave me a signal? All righty. So with this history in mind, what does it mean for us today? It's all interesting, right? Now you know the party's neutral, but what really does that mean for us today? The fact is that our only definitive statement of policy is the Statement of Principles. It's not the platform. The platform was intended to change with the times, to deal with things we could deal with now, and not necessarily say end game positions. So when people today say to me, no, the party takes a position because the platform mentions the government. Of course it does, because we have to live in the world we're in now and deal with it now. Once that's gone, then our platform wouldn't talk about it anymore. The platform is not our end goals and should not be used to bludgeon other libertarians. People make a very big mistake about that. As D. Frank Robinson described, the statement of principles is the star around which any number of satellite issue platform planks can revolve, collide, or be flung away. And our preamble makes that clear by saying, these present policies are not our goal. It even says that in the platform. Our goal is nothing less than a world set free in our lifetime. So quickly, and something that normally takes 20 minutes, I'll boil it down to 5. I like to give an example of this. And that's the issue of, is taxation theft? That's the big argument today. And people say to me, the platform doesn't say taxation is theft, therefore it's not. Now, you should realize it doesn't matter if the platform says that. Is it in the statement of principles? But we can do better than that. We'll talk about, slam, I'm proud of that. Come on now. Why isn't it moving? On second. Okay, in the 2016 convention, Jim Fulner said, be it resolved, taxation is theft. Following debate, the resolution was adopted by a voice vote. As we've seen, resolutions are as binding on policy as the platform is. It's subject to the same vote and the same review. But if you go through the statement throughout the years, you will see that taxation is theft had been, or in other words, had always been mentioned. Long-range goal. Since we believe that every man is entitled to the fruits of his labor, we are opposed to all activity which consists of the forcible collection of goods, blah, blah, blah. We support the eventual repeal of all taxation. What I want you to concentrate on is, every man is entitled to keep the fruits of his labors. Since that, then this. Where does that language about keeping the fruits of the labor come from? The statement of principles. This is the party founders' exposition of that phrase. And it includes repeal, eventual repeal of all taxation. Also said it explicitly in 1974. And if we continue down, also something interesting, in 76 it talks about taxing churches, but it says we oppose taxation of church property for the same reason we oppose all taxation. All right. So if we look at the 2016 platform, all persons are entitled to keep the fruits of their labor. What does that mean? We know what it means because that has always been in the plank. But we only right now talk about the income tax. So I have people tell me today, we're not opposed to all taxation, we're only opposed to the income tax. Nope. Why is the income tax singled out? Because that's our next goal. We can do it. Whoops. Okay, so that was, forget about that. And why did we single it out? David Nolan singled it out. He said that's the next thing on the target, and it's the worst possible tax there is, so let's get rid of it first. But that does not mean we're okay with other taxation. So that's why it's important to follow the statement of principles, so that you can properly understand the platform. And I could do this with any number of issues, but that happens to be one that's a hot topic now. So we will conclude, and I gotta try to, if I can put this up, I cannot, so we're gonna go by memory if we can. Why is my presentation called That Through Which Liberty Shall Prevail? I don't really want to go by memory because then I can insert all kinds of things. Forget it. I'll insert all kinds of things then. Our bylaws say the Libertarian Party, the statement of principles represents those principles upon which the Libertarian Party was founded, through which it shall be sustained, and through which liberty shall prevail. Anyone who says that libertarianism is whatever you want it to be, at least the Libertarian Party, libertarianism is whatever you want it to be. We're a big tent. No, it's not. It's the statement of principles. Our tent is prescribed by the statement of principles. A big tent is not a big top, and that's kind of what we've turned it into. But one thing you'll notice about it, this tent does not exclude people. If you agree with one thing with us, come on in, have a drink. The tent prescribes ideas. We never should be attacking people. We never should be excluding people. But we should be debating ideas. Nobody should act like you just ran over their dog and then backed up and ran it over again if you say a certain idea is not libertarian. I hold other ones that I'm not going to confess to you today that are in disagreement with the Libertarian Party, and I'll tell you, they're not libertarian ideas. All right, shoot me, bite me, whatever. It doesn't matter. I have my own ideas. But we need to be clear on what the party is and realize we're not attacking each other if we disagree on something, as long as we're referring back to the statement of principles. And doing that, we need to stop our game of throwing people out of the party that agree with us even on just one thing. All right, that's it. I want everyone here who is not a National Party member. I usually, see, I'm not a good liar, but I usually try to lie and say, I can look it up. I'm the secretary, and I'll know. No, they actually don't let us look that up. It's funny. Please come see me. I'd love for you to leave with a shirt. I'm on United, and they have the worst luggage policy, and I would love to be able to put other things in my luggage because, oh my God, that was the smallest plane I'd been on. I'm surprised it did not have, those twirly things in the front of it. So I thank everyone here. And is there 1 minute left or no? Okay. The Historical Committee. I'm the chair of the Historical Committee. That's where I'm interested in history. I know that's quite surprising. But I'm working on with a group of dedicated other people preserving our party history because I was shocked by what's going on here with the way we're losing our history. And it's not just for the mere academic love of history. Like me, I would frame, a tissue that David Nolan snotted in. That's not the only reason. The reason is we've put our principles don't change. So all these papers written over the years that we've paid for, they can be used again. There's nothing new under the sun. Some of these campaign slogans and campaign artwork, that 70s stuff is back in vogue. All of this stuff should be recycled, but it can't be because it's sitting in boxes. So if you go to lpedia.org, that is where all of this stuff is getting uploaded. Thousands of hours have already been put into it, but we're a small group. If you have the same passion of history I do, the committee is self-funded. Anything that the LNC allots us, I have to raise. So I would ask you to contribute to our effort, and it does count towards a membership. So if you want to be a member, you can say that $25 gets earmarked for the Historical Committee, and I will love you to pieces. But also, go register an account. You are a part of Libertarian Party history, unlike Wikipedia, who will crush your ego by saying you're not historically significant. If you've been a Libertarian for 1 second 10 years ago, you're significant enough to have an entry in LPedia. All of you have your own pieces. It will be important. Please go in and put your piece in and update the Missouri page because it's not good. And I thank you all so much. You have an awesome night.
Oh, thank you, Karen Ann. Thank you very much. Our next and final session of the evening will be our presidential candidate forum. We're going to clean the stage up here a little bit, give everybody a chance to maybe relieve themselves from a little bit of the dinner, and be back here in about 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes tops. Presidential candidate forum on the couches in about 10 minutes.
Now, first we have Arvin Vohra. Mr. Vohra is an American political author, educator, and former vice chairman of the Libertarian National Committee. He ran for the Maryland House of Delegates once, and and also for the U.S. House twice, and he was also a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2018. That's Arvin Vohra. Good to have you here. Adam Kokesh is also a presidential candidate here tonight. Mr. Kokesh is an American libertarian political activist, radio host, and author too. He's a former U.S. Marine Corps sergeant serving in Iraq in 2004, and upon his return to our country from Iraq, he became an anti-war activist and advocate for the Iraq veterans against the war sentiment. Mr. Adam Kokesh, thank you for being here as well. John Phillips is running as the vice presidential nominee in the race, along with running mate Kimberly Ruff. Mr. Phillips is a businessman, a mechanic, a writer, and an activist. He founded his county chapter of the Libertarian Party of Illinois, and he helped co-found others too. John Phillips worked promoting both state and presidential candidates during the 2016 election. So again, John Phillips, thank you for being here tonight as a vice presidential candidate. I guess I'm going to sit up here with you guys. I've been working hard. I'm going to sit down. That's how most people see me every night anyways. I'm sitting behind a desk here. So let's begin with some opening statements right now, and we'll have Mr. Vohra go first.
David, do you mind if I stand? Or?
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to stand. I like to stand when I speak. This culture that we're living in today, this culture has produced this government. And if we knock down this entire government today, if we achieve that anarcho-capitalist paradise of no government, then this culture will recreate this exact government tomorrow. And if you don't believe me, you can look at what happened earlier this year when a tiny little bit of this government was reduced. This culture clamored for the return of this government. And it wasn't just the politicians, it was Democrats, it was Republicans, it was independents who clamored to bring back this government. The LNC was no different. The LNC decried the fact that this shutdown had thrown the lives of federal workers into turmoil. If I'm elected, I will throw the lives of federal workers into turmoil. The great thing about culture is that if we change this culture, if we change this culture, it will change this government. The fact is this, any one of us here, anyone who might declare, has a tiny chance, an infinitesimally small chance of actual electoral victory, but 100% chance of changing culture. And so what I plan to do is use this campaign to change culture, to reduce government. And I'm going to give you just one example. I've pledged, and it's been covered in Reason Magazine, Bitcoin News, so many other places, that I am going to pardon on my first day Julian Assange, Ross Ulbricht, Edward Snowden, and every nonviolent drug user and drug offender that's currently locked up unjustly. But at the same time, wherever I go, including here right now, I'm going to remind people to jury nullify so that we can fight back against these state atrocities. My name is Arvin Vohra. My website is votevohra.com. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Vohra. All right, 2 minutes now to Mr. Kokesh for opening remarks.
Thank you, David, and to Arvin and John for being here tonight, and for all of you, and for Bill for making this happen, and especially Cecil is such a great host for this weekend, who's such a great host, he's actually willing to commit civil disobedience to make his guests comfortable here. So please give it up for Cecil for making this happen. And for Robin, thank you for the ride from the airport. Appreciate that too. Now, how many of you guys like being libertarian? How many of you love being libertarian? Okay, so some of you are new here, apparently. Now, I've been a libertarian my entire life. I discovered it about 20 years ago, and I think that's a better way of talking about how we come to this message and this understanding of freedom and what it means to all of us inherently as human beings. And I think what we can see now, with a little bit of perspective of history on this party, is that we've been beating our head against a wall, playing their game politically. Y'all know this is not a political movement nearly as much as it's an ethics movement, an idea movement, a principles movement. We don't have to shy away from those principles to be pragmatic. In fact, getting away from principles leads to unpragmatic results. And when I was asked for the first time, what would you do if you were president, after, letting out that little evil laugh like, what would I do? Well, I realized that there really is only one ethical thing to do. When you get handed the ring of power, you're supposed to throw it in the fire. And my platform is based on localizing the federal government, leaving us, after a bankruptcy process that's peaceful, orderly, and responsible, 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations. That's standing on principle. That's getting back to what the Libertarian Party is supposed to be about. That's how we bring people together. That's how we unify all Americans under freedom and not government. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kokish. And now 2 minutes from Mr. Phillips.
I'm running with Kim Ruff. Most of you have questioned that at some time because the Libertarian Party does not elect or select people to run for these offices that way, unlike the other parties. We're running together because we see eye to eye on so many things, and honestly because it's cheaper. We're also running on one major platform, and we're going to differ with Karen Ann here a little bit. Radical and pragmatic are not mutually exclusive. You can have a radical thought and a radical agenda and approach it in a pragmatic way and put it forth in a positive message that is not going to scare the muggles away. And that's why we're running. Thank you. My name is John Phillips.
Okay, John, thank you so much. We're going to move into some questions now, and I've prepared a couple questions, and I know we have some audience questions as well. And I think what we'll do is we will alternate turns on answering first, if that's okay with you guys. First, let's talk about abortion. It has certainly become a very hot topic across our nation, with many states now enacting new, tougher laws prohibiting abortion, including Missouri. If elected president or vice president, how will you approach the issue personally of abortion at the federal level, and how might your approach affect those who you might place on the U.S. Supreme Court? Mr. Vora, you can go first.
For my entire adult life, I've worked in education. And I don't want government involved in education at all. Not because I think education is unimportant, but because I think it is so important that we should not have government involved. That's why I oppose the existence of government schools. That's why I oppose the existence of government-funded, government-regulated, government-subsidized education in all of its forms. It's because I think it's important. Now, I do not support abortion. I don't. I think it is morally wrong. I don't see a difference, to be honest, between somebody who is 8 months and some number of days and somebody who's 9 months and a few days. That to me, that one is a minor medical procedure and one is murder. To me, that I don't agree with that. I do believe that abortion is murder. I do believe that it should be reduced. It's the wrong thing. And yet, I don't turn to government to fix that. Those of you who are very active in your local religious community, would you want the government to run your church? I don't think so. Would you want the government to dictate your ethics? No, they're not good at it. Fundamentally, they cannot be good at it because what they do is unethical. What they do is force. How can a government that goes around using violence to settle every minor dispute or just manufacturing disputes in order to justify violence, what business do they have telling people how to live ethically? So I, as president, will do everything I can to encourage people to use other methods. Encourage people to meet people who have even been raped and chosen to keep the child and seen how much that, I want those stories to be out there. And I don't want government to mismanage that. This is something that's so powerful, so ethical, and so personal that government has no place in it. So no, I don't support abortion, not one bit. I think it is morally wrong. But I don't want the government involved in it at all.
All right. Mr. Vora. Thank you. Mr. Cook, your same question. How might you approach the issue of abortion, and how might your approach affect those you would place on the U.S. Supreme Court?
Really, David? Can we start with a harder question?
Well, you know.
Sure?
Hey,
You wanna jump in with
they
this?
asked
All
the
right.
news guy to
Okay.
get up here. I got to bring up what's in the news right now, so.
Well, my personal position is that as President of the United States, I promise I will never have an abortion. It's very, very clear, very straightforward policy. You're welcome. We'll keep it as simple as that. But with my platform, it's taking the federal government and taking it down to the state level, localizing it entirely. So the idea of would policy be set at the federal level or not, it becomes an irrelevant question. There wouldn't be a Supreme Court to appoint a justice to. In terms of all the wonderful statements that Arvin said based on taking a life and the non-aggression principle, and whether or not the government has a role in that, abortion is clearly ending a human life, and it needs to be treated by society as seriously as that issue demands. And that in and of itself suggests to me right away from the get-go that government should be the last institution that we turn to deal with an issue as serious as this. And that we as a society, in order to really give this issue its due, need to step up in all the ways that we can outside of government to minimize the incidence of abortion, because I think that's something that everybody can get behind. And when we say, let's just hand this issue over to government, we end up turning it into a fight and a divisive issue that just keeps us distracted from the things that unite us, that should be uniting us in the more important policies. And it's really, you're correct, David, to point out that this is an important and current issue right now. I would say that as libertarians, we should be rising above being jerked around by the mainstream media in terms of what we're supposed to be talking about, because generally these kinds of divisive wedge issues are more intended to distract you from how we're all getting screwed together by government as Americans rather than left versus right.
Okay. Mr. Phillips, same question. How would you approach this with Ms. Ruff, and also how might it affect your decisions on who you would place in the Supreme Court?
We think that the platform of the Libertarian Party says it perfectly, that it is up to each individual's conscience to make that decision, and so absolutely the government should stay out of it. Also, this decision has already been made by the Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade. I am a radical, and hey, I'm not a big fan of the Supreme Court, but we do live under that right now, and I can't just wave a magic wand and make that go away. So we would encourage people to seek redress on the abortion issue through the Supreme Court if they believe that the issue is affecting them. There are means to do so. We would also address this issue by getting the government out of birth control entirely. It should be up to the woman or the man to decide what kind of birth control they want to use without government interference. We would also work on removing government restrictions on adoptions so that people have better options than abortion that are easier to attain. That would be our answer.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. We certainly these days hear a lot about people, voters in both parties, who say they feel disenfranchised from their own parties. I think that's a sentiment we certainly hear a lot these days. If you look at the last few elections, though, the Libertarian Party has actually garnered a lot more votes on the national level. Specifically in 2012, Gary Johnson, he received in that election 0.99% of the popular vote. That was 2012. Just 4 years later, Mr. Johnson ran again, and he received 3.29% of the popular vote. That's pretty significant in terms of a jump there in 4 years. So if chosen as the nominee, how will you try to reach out to appeal to voters in those two other major parties and perhaps try to sway them over to support the libertarian agenda? Mr. Kokish, you can begin on this one.
That's such a great question, and it's so true, and I'm glad that there are enough people now, especially within the party, looking at this from the perspective of how do we build a winning coalition across the general population. We're at that stage now as a movement, as a party. We're not just like, how do we get our bylaws organized and things like that. And the way that we do it is with our core principles. The same things that brought us to this message, that brought us to this party, can bring in more people, can unite America around these fundamentally human ideals of self-ownership, of the non-aggression principle. And we do this by presenting those principles manifest in a platform that is really consistent with that. And when you say, look, we're not going to argue anymore over federal policy. We're not going to try to fit every American into a one-size-fits-nobody but the politicians and the special interests and the profiteers kind of non-solution that we get from the federal government. You say we're going to localize it. This is the everybody gets what they want strategy. If you want this out of government in your community or you want that in your community, you can have that when you're not forced into one system that's imposed on everyone. So to appeal to the conscientious non-voters and the independents, I think when we come up with a platform that is breaking free of playing the old party game of saying, well, we're this on this issue, and this on this issue, and this on this issue. No, it's one issue, one principle. We stand for freedom. And when we stand firm on that principle, and we make it clear why we're here, we're not afraid to stand up for what we believe in, that's what attracts people. And giving people a real option when they know that there's little difference between the Democrats and Republicans, instead of saying, I'm going to be the best of both worlds, I'm going to be socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Say, no, we are fundamentally different because we believe in freedom. That's how you win. That's how you unite people.
Okay, Mr. Kokish, thank you very much. Same question, Mr. Phillips. How might you and Ms. Ruff appeal to those folks in the other two parties that feel disenfranchised and perhaps sway them over to the Libertarian Party?
We have a multi-pronged strategy for that. The first is, as I've mentioned many times, is listen. The first way to sway anybody is to listen to what they've got to say and relate to them and explain how then libertarian solutions can address their issues better than the Democrats and Republicans can. I have experience doing that. I had the Democrats supporting one of my local campaigns just recently. You go and you talk to people and you listen to them, and everybody complains about government. Everybody complains about how government gets in their life and does something. And then you say, well, let me help you get government out of the way. The second prong of our approach is we want to work very closely with local candidates and down-ticket candidates and go to their events because they're the people on the ground, and it's much easier for them to reach across the aisle than at the national level. So you go to their events and you help them get publicity, and it gives you an opportunity to speak to people on both sides. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Phillips, thank you. Mr. Vora, same question. How are you going to get folks over here to your side?
I'll tell you, the first principle that I have here is pandering does not bring people to your side. It brings you to their side. And so if you're looking for someone who's going to pander, someone who's going to find ways to phrase libertarianism in statist language, I know how to do it. I've done it. I've done it publicly. You can see YouTube videos of me doing it live. So it's not that I don't know how to. I don't think it's a winning strategy. A winning strategy to me is saying, what is our goal? Our goal is less government. That's what it comes down to. Our goal isn't winning just to win. Our goal is less government. So there's certain things that I want to accomplish. And a lot of this involves a certain amount of media manipulation. One is I want as many people in the United States to know that jury nullification brought freedom of press to America. I want as many people to know that as currently know, thanks to Gary Johnson, where Aleppo was. I want to make sure that as many people right now who are fed up with government schools, who are finding themselves saying disgusting things, like to their kids, saying things like, well, your teacher this whole year isn't very good, but go ahead and damage your education for a year, we'll try to do better next time. That's a symptom of frustration, not bad parenting. I want to see that end, and that ends by information, exposure to these ideas. I want to see more people using Bitcoin, using Dash, using Monero, so that we are not ending the Fed through legislation, but just putting it out of business through competition. I want to see more people doing what's already happened. Fewer and fewer people are enlisting. Fewer and fewer people are joining the police, to the point that police departments are advertising across state lines. I want them to have to advertise to a different planet and still not be able to succeed. I want there to be less government because our culture will have changed. And when people have opted out of the sacred cows of the state, when they've started thinking differently, they will vote libertarian because they will actually be libertarian.
Mr. Vora, thank you. Gentlemen, you're doing exceptionally well staying on time. I'm very impressed here. The timekeeper's having an easy night here.
We're
Let's do
really
some
good
audience
following rules as libertarians.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we break them in the media. No, I'm kidding. I'm not fake news. Okay. Okay, so we're going to do some audience questions now, right? And we're going to do 2-minute responses as well. Do we have some questions lined up? Okay, that's fine. Do we have a question? Yeah, go ahead. Just go ahead and ask it, and I'll kind of rephrase it again.
So, in 2010, the city of Cleveland started an effort to go ahead and reduce its backlog of over 6,000 rape kits. That was out of a statewide total of 16,000. As of 2018, they had completed virtually all of that. 800 prosecutions. Over half of those were actually serial repeat rapists with multiple offenses. Other states, Missouri has over 6,000. My question to you is, because the results from Cleveland showed that 40 different states, the DNA was collected across 40 different states. This is not just isolated to Cleveland or Ohio. I would ask you, what role, if any, do you see federal law enforcement in helping across states, facilitating ending the backlog and putting serial rapists behind bars?
Okay, so thank you, sir, for your question. The question basically is, what role do you see the federal government, and if I'm wrong, you tell me if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, having in terms of law enforcement at the federal level, helping to get the backlog of cases dealt with and putting more serial rapists behind bars as they did in Cleveland, correct?
Because it's across states. Again, that one sample out of Cleveland had DNA from rapists across 40 different states.
Okay, so one sample, obviously, across 40 states there. So do you kind of get what he's saying there? Mr. Phillips, you go first this time.
The first and simple answer is end law enforcement on other issues that's not important. When they are not enforcing the unconscionable war on drugs that has incarcerated so many for nothing, then we can process rape kits and we can process real criminals. Then, if they've got some spare time, which they will because we will have put them out of work, we can then put them on helping process those rape kits.
Okay. All right, Mr. Phillips, thank you. So let's go now to Mr. Vora this time.
First, thank you for your question. What you're describing is one of the most disgusting misuses of police funds, of police resources, probably in history. We have an entire federal agency, the DEA, to handle drugs. We have so much law enforcement used for drugs and all these non-existent non-crimes. We have so much nonsense for all of that, and yet, nationwide, we're talking about tens of thousands of rape kits just unprocessed. That means after somebody's been sexually assaulted, they've done the evidence collection, they've gone through this terrifying and invasive process, they've reported to the police, nothing has happened. And because this is so traumatic, people often don't follow up. They're not in the state where they're going to be calling the police every day on their own. And they're just basically been forgotten about. That is the result of letting the government handle something. This is what happens when you let people mismanage funds. And I wish I could say it had ended, but it hasn't. Right now, one of the most recent laws to pass unanimously in the House was a ban on child sex dolls. In other words, we're not going to go after the actual traffickers of actual children. We're going to go after the dolls. Who cares? I agree that with most people that child sex dolls, they're weird and gross. But to misuse law enforcement because you're acting with your heart, not even your heart, you're acting with your fear of what voters might think instead of with your brain, that to me is unconscionable. So does the federal government have any involvement in that? Absolutely not. They've shown they can't handle it. This is something that should be managed independently by private groups that can actually address it, that will actually get your back when it most matters, because they have failed. That failure is disgusting. It should never be repeated again. And there is no place for that kind of incompetence in crimes of such horrificness.
Okay. Mr. Vora, thanks. And Mr. Kokish, what are your thoughts on this?
This is something that I've been familiar with for many years from when I was doing Adam versus the Man, just covering the news when it first came out that there were police departments where you had the backlogs of rape kits while they were testing drug samples and prosecuting people for cannabis possession and things like that. So as has been said, obviously, end the war on drugs. you're going to have a huge reduction in the misallocation of resources that go into justice services. And in terms of how do we minimize those misallocations, the answer again is to localize. And when you localize government, you get it more in line with the needs of the communities that it's allegedly serving. And so when you centralize it, you get those misallocations. Now, the part of your question that I don't think has been really addressed yet is in terms of the federal government's role today in coordinating between the states and different departments when you have DNA samples and different databases, right? And I love that you're asking that question, and from a libertarian perspective of how do we do this without government, we get a much better answer even in what we're capable of. Because it shouldn't be simply restricted to, well, we have this safe space known as the area within the U.S. borders where law enforcement coordinates. It needs to be international. It needs to be, we need to have a system, if we're really going to say that we are committed as a society to holding criminals accountable, that we don't recognize imaginary lines drawn on a map that say, well, if you're within these borders as a criminal, we're going to treat your crime this way, and if you're outside, we're going to treat it that way. And this gets back to, I think, what is the most important core principle of libertarianism when we apply it to these issues of criminal justice, and that's no victim, no crime. Get the government out of the victimless crime punishment business, and you're going to have a lot more freedom and a lot more justice, especially on this issue.
All right, Mr. Kokish, thanks. Who would like to go next? Go ahead.
What question would you like someone to ask you about foreign policy?
The question is, what question would you like someone to ask you about foreign policy? Mr. Vora, you can go first.
With the possible exception of Adam, I've probably answered more questions on foreign policy on national and international TV than probably anybody else in this room. And if you've seen my interviews, you'll notice that it doesn't matter what they ask. I'm talking about a few things. I'm talking about leaving NATO and letting socialist Europe pay for its own defense. American taxpayers do not need to be paying for the defense of France and Germany and Israel and Saudi Arabia and any other country. So that comes up whether they ask it or not. You know, people have talked about Gary Johnson's Aleppo moment, saying, well, you know, that could happen to anybody. You know, Adam, who's been in the media a lot, you know, John, I've seen you in a couple interviews as well, more recently. That happens in the media. And I'm going to tell you an example of one time that this happened to me. On Election Day, 2016, I was there in a live debate. It was me. I was being interviewed by Jesse Ventura, and there was a Green Party person in a different state. And here's what happened. My earpiece cut out. I couldn't hear what the other person was saying. I had literally no idea. And no one here in this room saw that I stumbled on that part because I didn't, because I've practiced exactly this type of stuff. You, of course, in the media know how important that kind of practice is. So what question do I wish they would ask me? Should we leave NATO? And I would say, yes, we should leave NATO and cut taxes accordingly. If we leave NATO, we are also going to be able to massively scale back our military. Right now, we have a military many times as big as we need because we are preparing to subsidize, you know, Europe, essentially. It's just like, imagine a parent whose kids have moved out and still has a 50-bedroom house just so that they can come there and drop and have their storage nonsense in there. That's what we're doing. We have a military 1,000 times the size of anything we need just so we can deal with the incompetences of socialist Europe, and I would end that.
All right, Mr. Vora, thank you. Mr. Kokish, what question would you like somebody to ask you about foreign policy?
Well, thanks, Greg, and for your work as executive director here in Missouri. It might not sound like a foreign policy question, but I wish that I was asked, what does it mean to be a warrior? And it's a term that in the Marine Corps we threw around a lot and was really a big part of the esprit de corps of we're the warriors, you know, we're the first to fight and all of that. And the most destructive perversion of the American ideal has been to ignore the founders' advice to not have a standing army, to have a militia-based defense, and to have perverted what is a truly noble instinct in humanity in the warrior class of society into militarism. And a warrior is someone who stands up for what's right, who fights injustice, who protects the undefended. A soldier is someone who follows orders. A soldier is someone who does the bidding of politicians. And that's how innocent people get killed. That's how wars that are totally unfounded in any concept of justice get prosecuted on behalf of the military-industrial complex. Because the warriors in this country, and in that sense, I would include every member of the Libertarian Party, because you are the people who stand up to fight injustice in a way that's way more in line with the crap propaganda lines that we got about what it meant to be a warrior in the military. And if we can do that as a society and for America to say, no, we're going to reject militarism, and we're going to embrace instead what it means to actually be a warrior and stand up and fight for what's right, I think that could be the single most important shift in American politics today. Are there any other veterans in the room today? Just show of hands. Thank you for your, I'm sorry for your servitude, but thank you for being here. And to all of the veterans who are propelled towards freedom from their military service, the more we encourage that and embrace that and that warrior spirit at the core of that, I think the sooner we're going to have the revolution that we've been waiting for here.
Thank you, Mr. Kokish. Mr. Phillips, your thoughts? A question you'd like somebody to ask you about foreign policy?
I'm going to take the easy way out and say I don't have one, because it all answers the same. All answers on foreign policy come down to eliminating our interference in other countries, eliminating our giving money to other countries, our eliminating borrowing money from other countries. It's that simple. I apologize if my short answers are short for everybody, but I like to get to the point.
All right. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, so basically, the journey as far as promoting the libertarian message doesn't just end in 2020. So while I love hearing all your messages and you guys are saying wonderful things, the question is, if you are the nominee, what is your campaign strategy to, one, not only maximize your voice to the American people, but also grow the party so that way that voice can ripple beyond 2020?
Okay, thank you, sir. So the question is, if you're the nominee, how will you grow your message and look beyond 2020 to grow? Obviously, you want to win the White House, but if that doesn't happen, how will you be working to grow support for the Libertarian Party on a nationwide basis? And I believe Mr. Kokish should go first this time.
Thanks, Alex. It's a great question. I think from what we've seen from nominees in the past several cycles, and without having to name any names, we've seen that there's been a huge opportunity missed by nominating candidates that aren't really part of the party, that come in to win the nomination and then leave. And instead of being a part of this, because they're motivated for the same reasons that most of us are, they're motivated by political reasons. And I'd like to say that of all the candidates I've met so far this cycle for the Libertarian nomination, none of them would be like that. They are all amazing candidates, not just Arvin and John and Kim, but Dan, Taxationist Theft Berman, and Christopher Marks, and Soraya Foss, and am I leaving anybody? And Ben Leader. And we have another potential candidate in the room, Phil Gray. I'm going to call him out and say I hope everybody encourages him to run, because I know he'd be a similarly grassroots party-connected kind of candidate. And I mean, to answer your question, I mean, you're kind of asking us to say, what's our plan, or to sort of, and we could all say, well, we're going to be committed to the party. We're going to keep going to state conventions. We're going to, keep doing media interviews. We're going to keep putting out content online. We're going to stay active on social media. And I think we'd all want to say some version of the same thing, because we're all people who really care deeply about the success of the party long term. And I think just we can all be judged on our merits, on our history. And I can just say that I've been a lifetime member for 15 years. I've stood up a local county. I think I've been to more state conventions than anybody who's ever run for the nomination at this point already. And this is what I live for. I've been a full-time libertarian activist for since I got out of the Marines, November 30, 2006. And I've been at it pretty much full-time since then. So I don't know how to stop. And if I have the honor of the nomination of this party, I'm going to do everything I can to leverage that for the next 4 years until someone else gets that title, or if I'm honored to get it again.
Okay, Mr. Kokish, thank you. Mr. Phillips, what would you do to advance the party and its message beyond 2020?
That's actually the root of our campaign plan. We have assembled a team that are working on training or already trained and taking this data that we're collecting and turning it over to the party. That is part of our plan. It hasn't always been accomplished by previous candidates, as we know. Also part of our plan is working with local candidates. That's where you grow the grassroots support. You go work with you show up, you go talk to your local candidates, city council, mayor, whatever. You go spend time with them and the people that they are working with, and that's how you grow the party. We can put a great message out on national television, though we all know sometimes getting that coverage might be a little more difficult. Or we can go to these local events and get local news media to come to our events and cover it and get the word out that way. And that's our plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Vora, how would you work to advance the party's message beyond 2020?
I want to talk a little bit about my track record in this area. When I was a representative at large on the Libertarian National Committee, our Facebook page, our social media was functionally non-existent. We had to fight tooth and nail just to put out anything, and basically put out nothing anyway. And when John J. Myers and I took over that, we made it a project that brought in volunteers. So many people that run various pages today are now trained by the National Facebook page team. And that's something that I did long before I was running for president. When it comes to the new Libertarian Party logo, I was the person that really pushed that through. I was on the committee. I was the main contact point to make that happen. So I've already been heavily involved in growing and branding the Libertarian Party. This is not something that I'm going to just start doing now. The question is right now, the reason that I ran for LNC in the first place was that I knew that for us to do what we needed to do, we couldn't let the old LNC do it. And that was back when when Wayne Root and folks like that were mismanaging the LNC and preventing any kind of outreach. The reason that I'm running for president right now is I don't think that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld did a competent job in 2016. I think, and it's not just Aleppo moments and things like that, although those are not great, but I think that instead of actually representing the brand, clearly conveying our ideas, they tried to water them down to basically nothing. And the result is, instead of bringing in hardcore principled activists who stay, we brought in summertime libertarians that were just like, oh, I didn't realize you guys don't want income tax in public schools. I thought you guys just wanted fair tax and maybe one day legalize medical marijuana. And so my plan is to stand for our actual principles, because I am not a visionary like David Nolan. I know that David Nolan was a visionary. I know that his ideas and the ideas that so many of you have brought forward, those are a powerful tool, and I will bring those ideas to the American people.
Thank you, gentlemen. Maybe one more audience question. Anybody have a question out there? Yes, sir.
I want to direct my comment to Mr. Ora, and I want to go back to the abortion issue. And I kind of agree that the government should stay out of it. But who's going to protect the conceived? And you kind of indicated that it should be a matter of personal conscience. But things have changed in America. Maybe you haven't noticed it. There are a few people with consciences, you know, that they have abortions for convenience. And I think this is a horror. It's a horror. And I want to ask you, how do you think that you could change or build the consciousness of individual Americans, especially our young?
So the question being basically that we've got some people now who perhaps use abortion as a means of convenience to end a pregnancy. How might you try to change the conscience, if I'm saying this correctly, of young America? And I think we're going to start, he said you first, but I was going to go in order. So Mr. Phillips, I think you're next, right?
We're going to use a word that Mr. Vora has used repeatedly already. It starts with education. everything starts with education. Now, does it start with public education or personal education? You take your pick. We prefer, personal education, obviously. And that's where it starts. You cannot make a change without education. We've seen that in Portugal with their success in ending the war on drugs. We see that repeatedly over and over and over. You cannot change people with a gun. You change it with education. Then, going back to my earlier answer, we would make other methods far more convenient. There are male birth control methods all over the world that are not legal here in the United States that are easily reversible. There are birth control methods here that are hard for women to get that should be very easy for women to get. And then it becomes more convenient to prevent the pregnancy than to abort the pregnancy.
Okay, Mr. Phillips, thank you. Mr. Vora, how would you address the conscience of young America?
First, I really want to thank you for that question, because that question is the center of not just this issue, but I think most libertarian issues in one way or another. One of my beliefs as an educator, and this is something that comes from the Sudbury School, is that learning is something that you do. It's not something that is done to you. A good teacher gives a student an opportunity to learn, creates the environment in which a student can learn. But hammering facts and yelling at students is not, in my opinion, teaching. And when it comes to ethics, ethics is something that you do. It's not something that's done to you. A couple of years ago, as most of you remember, there was a big hoopla because I said then, as I do believe now, that killing on behalf of the state in the military is morally wrong. I believe it is no different from murder. I don't think that a government permission makes an abhorrent action no longer abhorrent. And the people who are damaged by this, there's actually two people. First is the person being killed, who's very obviously being damaged. And then there's the person doing the killing and the struggling. I've met so many people ever since then. I mean, obviously, ever since that, I've talked to a lot of veterans on this topic, as you might imagine. And many have talked about the personal difficulty, the scarring, the emotionality of coming to terms with something that they did, that they wish they hadn't done. And so many of those people have become instrumental to preventing other people from making that same mistake. So when we talk about this action, which is currently, it's the same thing. It's a government-approved, morally abhorrent action. That's not going to be changed by government, and it's not going to be changed by preventing people from doing ethics. Ethics is not something that's done to you. It's something that you do. But it is something that can change by people listening to other people's experiences, by being open to these ideas, by us engaging not in an aggressive and cruel way, but in a way that lets people explore these ideas morally. And I think that if we let that natural ethical process take the place of the current government's force, we will see those changes happen.
All right, Mr. Vora, thank you. Mr. Kokish?
Well, I got to echo a lot of what they said. I think there are really two things to answer that question of what I would want to see happen, what I would want to be a part of to make sure that we minimize abortion, that there is some, I mean, as you say, you ask who's protecting, right? And it really becomes everyone's job when we take on that responsibility for life as a society. And I think, so the first thing about health freedom, as John pointed out, getting Americans access to so many technologies and medications and other things around reproductive rights and issues that are either kept impractical or illegal or financially unviable because the healthcare costs are driven up by taxes and regulations and so on. And I think just that and all the other prosperity that comes from minimizing government is going to reveal so many other ways that we can't even imagine for how we can support single mothers in those circumstances who might be considering having an abortion out of convenience. And the second thing, again, as has been pointed out, education. And this comes back to our core principles, the non-aggression principle, self-ownership. You know, what qualifies you for that is an independent human consciousness. The NAP applies to you. And so right now, when we ask the question, what do we do about a life? We don't have a universal standard for that. You know, it's kind of sad as a society to see that we've come so far, humanity, to become more ethical. You know, don't hit, don't steal, don't kill as universal standards, except that we've made this exception for government. And you say, well, what do we do about the issue of life? Well, then we have to go, well, is it an Iraqi life? Is it a Honduran life? Is it an American life? And obviously that's nonsense. A human life is a human life is a human life, and when we get past punishment to the paradigm of justice and making victims whole and preserving life and safety and freedom, that's when we're going to get real justice on this issue.
Closing now? Thank you all for your questions out there. Thank you, gentlemen, for answering the questions. It's time for closing remarks now. You each received 2 minutes, and Mr. Vora, if you'd like to go first.
In 2008, we had an incredible opportunity. That was Dr. Mary Ruwart, true, hardcore, principled libertarian. On the other side, we had Bob Barr and Wayne Root, Republican moderates who both left the Libertarian Party. Wayne Root, by the way, was on the LNC at the time with me, who left the Libertarian Party so that they could endorse Mitt Romney. The Republican moderates went to endorse the other Republican moderate, no big surprise. How did that mistake happen? It was because we let ourselves become afraid of somebody who was going to explore every issue deeply and from an ethical libertarian standpoint. With Dr. Ruwart, they found out that she had written about issues of age of consent. They took it out of context, put it in Time magazine, and scared the daylights out of the delegates, who then frightenedly voted for Bob Barr and Wayne Root because they seemed sort of famous. That mistake has cost us. That mistake has cost us great activists, principled candidates bring in principled activists. And it also led to the growth, in my opinion, of things like the alt-right. Because all the people who are ready to rebel, to fight against the status quo, didn't come here because we didn't want to upset the status quo. They went somewhere else, to places that have toxic and dangerous ideas. Culture can change government. The most unpopular thing I've ever said has probably been this: the Libertarian presidential candidate doesn't have a huge chance of winning, but it has a huge chance, but he or she has a huge chance of changing culture. I will work to change that culture. I will work to end the drug war through jury nullification. I'll work to end the Fed through Bitcoin. I'll work to abolish government schools by encouraging people to homeschool. I will work to end the wars and end police brutality by encouraging people to refuse to sign up or enlist for those abhorrent organizations. My name is Arvin Vora. I'm running for president to end the welfare state and end the income tax, and you can learn more about me at votevora.com.
Mr. Kokish, 2 minutes.
Well, we're all ready to stand for our closing remarks here, so we're going to get serious now. I'm going to do something, though, I don't think I've ever seen done at a presidential debate, and that's I'm going to fundraise for my opposition. We have more great candidates that couldn't be here tonight. We have more great campaign teams coming together that need the support of people like you who care about this party, who care about this message, who care about this opportunity in 2020 to get behind the candidates now so that they can make the rounds, that they can get to state conventions, that they can get out, that they can get in the media and be taken seriously so that we have a chance of making a major impact in 2020. So if you're not involved with something, I know there are a lot of people here who are doing great things within the state party. And for those of you who are showing up here in an off year, thank you. You guys are the backbone of this party, and I think it's the backbone of this entire movement. So thank you for being a part of it. Now, there's a little thing I'll say just to differentiate the platform that I've embraced with this campaign that I think is truly unique. And every time I have to introduce myself as a presidential candidate, I throw up in my mouth a little bit. Because you really have to be some kind of psychopath to want, present company excluded, but you really have to be a psychopath to want to be president of the United States, to say, I think I should have this power and authority over other people. And I could stand up here and give you a big, rah-rah speech and get everybody cheering and on their feet and say, yeah, liberty and freedom and stuff, but that's not how this is going to happen. We're not going to solve the problems that we face with the same tools that have failed to solve them in the past. We need to think differently. We need to think outside the box Getting more in touch with our principles gives us the answers through localization and unity, bringing together all Americans and the core values that make us American. I hope to have your support in Austin next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Kokesh brought up a good point. You have to be a psychopath to want this job. In one of my earliest interviews after we announced that we were running, I was asked that question, why do you want this job? And I got a lot of grief for my answer. I don't want this job. I don't. Nobody in their right mind wants this job. I'm standing up to do this job because I have to. Because somebody has to stand up for us and take our liberties back. And I think these two gentlemen feel the same way, which is why we are not psychopaths. I differ a little bit from these gentlemen in that we do have to use the tools that are being used. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are bound, if we get elected, by the Constitution of the United States. And so we will do everything in our power to reduce government within those bounds. We will not make executive orders to grow government, but we can make executive orders to reduce it. We can hiring freeze. We can order the DEA to reschedule drugs. We can change all kinds of policies at that level. We can order the Social Security Administration to remove many of their requirements on Medicaid and Medicare that reduces the effectiveness of care and increases the cost. Those are things we can do in addition to working with Congress in a constitutional manner. My name's John Phillips. I'm seeking the vice presidential nomination. I urge you to support my presidential candidate, Kim Ruff. You can visit us at ruffphillips2020.com. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I just want to thank you for letting me come out tonight. I'm going to make a pitch to you guys, if that's okay. I've been doing news for 23 years, and I have no reason to stand up here and lie to you. We take a beating, as you all know, at the national level, and that is trickling down to the local level right now, and what we do to bring you fair and accurate news coverage. And I had this very discussion with somebody in my family this morning at 7:30 over breakfast as we were preparing for our graduation reception. And I would just tell you that we have a lot of posters around our Color 10 newsroom that talk about ethics, standards, journalism, and we adhere to those guidelines and principles daily. And one of those says to be a voice for the voiceless. And I think your party has probably been voiceless in a lot of ways. Would you agree? I think you haven't probably had a lot of the coverage that you probably deserve. So I'm here to say I don't owe you anything, but I will make you the pledge. If you all make us aware of your events and things like that, we will certainly do our very best to get those covered. Because I think, you know, people are obviously, if you look at those election results that I quoted there at the beginning of our forum, people have an interest in other alternatives to what they just see as the two parties. And so if we can help raise that awareness, that's our job, to give voice to the voiceless. So I want to thank you for being here, and I'll remind you your convention, your national convention is coming up in in Austin, Texas next year, May 22nd through the 25th, 2020. Thank you guys. It was fun. Thank you all. Thanks, guys. So if one of you guys gets it, Color 10 News gets the first local exclusive, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Good luck to you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that will conclude this 2019 Missouri Libertarian Convention. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, presidential candidates for the forum. I started the morning by saying it's fantastic that you came here today. It is you who give a damn. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't feel strongly about the Libertarian Party. We feel very fortunate to have you part of the Missouri LP. It's people like you who are going to spread this word. Let's go over three of the major points that we had for the day. It's your responsibility to field and run candidates. It's your responsibility to take a friend to run as a candidate with you, and it's your responsibility to support the causes that you believe in. And I think it's fantastic that you were all here today, and I really, really appreciate it. I cannot say how great this was for Cecil Ince to bring this off today. It was at the last minute that we had nothing coming together. This man worked tirelessly to get this done, and he did a fantastic job. And please, recognize Cecil for a great job today. We don't have a date set for next year's convention, but we know because it's an election year, we will do it near or at the filing season. So that'll be a February election. It's February convention. So be looking for our updates on the web page as soon as we figure it out as a body. February 22nd. I'm already told. So that's okay. So that concludes it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on February 22nd.